Hello, everyone, again. We have in front of us on the first slide the word change in big capital letters and in red. I'd like you to just take a moment and reflect on that word and be mindful of the first thoughts or impressions that come to your mind as you read that word change on the page. Maybe you'd like to jot that down. What's your first impression in a word or a phrase? The word change. Well, when I talk with most people, they come up with both positive and negative reactions to that word. But often, the response I get is dominated by negative reactions, fear, trauma, flashbacks, uncertainty, risk. And that's one of the things that perplexes so many of us as project managers, as business analysts, as business people, when we're confronted with the need to change. And that need for change is, as I think many of us are going to agree, is almost continuous. So what do we do in order to succeed when change is before us? Perhaps change through the kind of project on which you're assigned right now. So if we take a look at the next slide, there are three major factors that are going to be touched on in some depth in our webinar session together today. And what we found at Group Atlantic is what has been also published by an organization that you can Google and find more information about if you're not already familiar. It's an organization called ProSci, you see noted at the bottom of the slide. That's when we're trying to execute change through projects, we need to meet project objectives, and it has to happen within the budgets and time that we have allowed, and it's supposed to produce organizational results, often measured in ways like return on investment and so forth. In order for to make that successful, of course, there are three areas. One is, we can think of it as a project on the lower left-hand corner of the triangle. And clearly, projects are more successful, in my experience, where there's strong leadership, not just sponsorship in terms of dollars and cents. So we're going to talk about project management. We're going to talk about leadership. And there's also a process. There's principles and a process informed by principles and many techniques that are now known and you may be familiar with that are referred to as change management or also organizational change management. So what we found at Group Atlantic is that no one of these three legs of the stool, so to speak, are sufficient alone. Because in the absence of any one or more of these legs, we don't usually find success. And there's a lot of frustration around organization change and the kind of change that has to take place through successful projects without all three of these being in place. In fact, it's even worse than that. Sometimes we can meet the letter of the law in terms of objectives and projects being on time and on budget. And the problem is, unless there is utilization by end users, so to speak, the projects are still not successful. Quick story about an executive client I have. Her name is Kathy. She was named by the CEO of her company as the model of what a successful project manager should be, hitting all the project objectives, being on time and on budget, and yet the client for which they delivered the end results of the product and project, rather, didn't utilize the solution at all. So can one consider that successful? Well, organizational change needed to happen in that user organization as well. So it's about utilization in order to achieve the business benefits, to realize favorable business results. What we'll do is first step through what does it take to be a successful in change, whether you're a project manager or a business analyst or a technical lead, perhaps you're just merely some kind of participant supporting a change in your organization. The first component we'll talk about is about leadership. So again, I'd like you to reflect about this question. What kind of leader do you need to be? Think about this in a very personal way. What kind of leader do you need to be? And one way that I think is helpful for you to think about that is to begin thinking right now about someone whom you personally respect based on what you've observed them to be able to do. You know that they get consistently, time after time, they get things done, and they get them done on time, and they get them done comprehensively. In fact, their track record, they have a legacy of successes that leads to them often getting called on, especially for the tough situations. What I'd like you to do is just picture in your mind that person based on your own professional and organizational experience. Who is that? Put a name on it. Okay. If you have that in your mind, I'd like you to ask yourself, so what made them successful? Criteria comes to mind. What kind of attribute did they exhibit that was really the differentiator for them from that they were among the critical few that were successful in project execution, the implementation of strategy, through change management? About that person. It's not likely that they were successful because of the certification of, let's say, their project management knowledge or their business analysis knowledge, or they were certified in some sort of change management framework. So it's more than what we know. And it's actually more than the process steps as well. So what could be the keys for leadership? I'll tell you what, if you Google after or during, for that matter, this webinar, the word leadership, you're probably going to get 80 million, maybe even 100 million hits. So the question is, where do you begin? Well, it turns out that Group Atlantic and a partner firm published a book, actually, that said, well, where do we start with answering? How do you identify the critical few things to be successful as a leader? And so the methodology there was to say, well, who's been successful at leadership, who's published which work? Key is, what are the common things, not the comprehensive code, but the common things that apply to almost any kind of leadership position, from first-line leadership all the way up to perhaps a CEO of a Fortune 50 organization. And it turns out that there were these 5 things that you see, and they're organized on this page, a code for leadership, in 2 dimensions. If we look in the upper right-hand quadrant, in the long term and organization-wide, it calls for us to be strategists. And in the near term, but organization-wide, it calls on us to be executors of that strategy. So there's a combination of 2 things to be. It's about being strategists. It's about being executors. If you look at the left-hand corner, in the near term, but to the individual focus, we have talent, people through which projects are accomplished, through which strategies are executed. So to be a successful leader, we have to develop a capability and be a talent manager. And finally, in the upper left quadrant, in the longer-term view, but also on the focus of the individual, developing human capital. So in the lower left quadrant, talent managers are more about who do we need now to get change to happen today and in the near term. And in the upper left-hand quadrant, being a human capital developer, is all about who's going to go along with us later. These are the 4 key quadrants of being successful in leadership, including in leading organizational change. And you notice the 4 quadrants are bound together right in the center by something that is essential and critical as a prerequisite for the success in any one of those other 4 quadrants. If we take a look at the next slide on 13, there's an enumeration that we'll go through individually with some examples about the 7 principles of personal proficiency. So in order to be a better strategist, a better executor, a better talent manager, a better human capital developer, to develop a legacy of successes in executing strategy through projects and through organizational change management, about you. It's about your qualifications to lead. If you take that first principle, let's take a closer look at that. Practice clear thinking, rising above the details. When things get hectic, chaotic, not as planned, this is the call for personal proficiency. And one example I like to think about is Chelsea Sullenberger, who was the captain of the flight that, upon departure from LaGuardia Airport, lost power in both engines. A fellow who completed a military career never landed on an airport he didn't intend on landing. He almost completed a civil aviation career, never landed on an airport he didn't intend on landing. And within moments after departure, things were about to change. Things began moving very quickly. He was called upon to rise above the details and practice clear thinking. So his first thought was to go back to LaGuardia.